You know what, ladies and gentlemen? What's worth its weight in gold? I'll tell you what's worth its weight in gold. And education. And we're going to be talking with one of the most educated charismatics that I know of. Someone who has a classical education background, who's very authoritative in media and what's happening with the universities. And I think we're going to be having a very fun talk today. I've got my son in the studio and Gordon Riddle Pennington. I never did ask him about how he got his middle name Riddle, but perhaps we'll have him on at some other point in the future and talk about that. The other thing that's worth its weight in gold, by the way, is gold. I was so shocked the other day. I was just doing my promo here for, Birch Gold, and I did a quick search on my AI. I said, how much did gold go up in the last year? For like 46%. How much in the last 2 years? Like 70%. Do you know where it's going up to now? It's like, as we're talking, 3,400, 3,500. And as my dear friend Donald Trump continues to shake up the world and all the economies, everybody's getting the jitters. Where's everyone going? Gold. They don't trust the American dollar. They're not sure what's happening. Maybe you shouldn't either. Go to lancewallnau.com/gold, because if I had an investment for you that would go up 70% in 2 years, you jump in on it, like being in the early days of Amazon or Google. Well, sorry to say it. Gold is where you want to look. lancewallnau.com/gold. And don't tell me you can't do it. I can't afford it. Talk to them. They've got specialists. Discuss it with them and watch what happens. Now, let's get into today's really cool dialogue with my son, Carl, and Gordon Pennington. I'm having a debate in my studio right now, ladies and gentlemen, about music copywriting.
Off and running.
Can I have a keyboard right over here? What if I play a song on the keyboard that is like a song? If it's public domain,
it's fine.
I'm not going to get shut down by Facebook.
Not for public domain stuff.
Mighty fortresses. I can play whatever I want over here.
It's public domain. That's fine.
Public domain.
Yeah, that's totally fine. But if it's somebody's intellectual property, then you don't have the rights to use it.
Is this public domain? No. That isn't?
I don't think so.
Well, that's funicula. Ladies and gentlemen, my guest today, Gordon Riddle Pennington. I'll put my hand. Gordon Pennington.
Thank you. It's great to be here. And this is surely one of the most eclectic television sets in America, because I don't know where I am, somewhere between the Cambrian explosion and a German Brauhaus and Oktoberfest. And
we have Einstein sitting over here getting some wisdom, sitting on the King James Bible, but also show people George Soros.
George Soros.
We've had him here on the set for years. I need to introduce you to people. So George Soros riding a Tyrannosaurus, for those of you on the podcast, which I found that is an ever-diminishing audience that I have. I didn't know that till today. So if you're on the podcast, or if you want to know the podcast, we do things in the podcast. We should do things in the podcast we don't do anyplace else. That would be how we build the podcast, I found out.
That's a strategy.
This collection of characters in the little box.
Well, I've got my Joe Biden, including a little bald spot on the back of his head. This is Joe Biden. He's wandering around, and and then we have Barack Obama and Nancy Pelosi. And how did they get here? I don't quite remember, except that as I was talking, there's Fauci, of course. And we never quite figured out how to work them into the set. I was going to have little character
Never seen that collection in the Mattel catalog, but there they are.
You don't see it. You might
Where
see
do
it
these
in
things
Lego
come
World.
from?
Here's Ocasio.
Canada.
I don't have a Bernie. I should get Bernie. Ocasio-Cortez.
Well, you can't get a Bernie until everybody gets a Bernie. It's a socialist thing.
What's that?
I said you can't get a Bernie until everybody gets a Bernie. It's a socialist thing.
It's a Bernie. Feel
the
you
burn.
see the RFK exchange with Bernie? Still my favorite one. These guys are Democrats. They've known each other for so long. When you are going over the vaccines, and Bernie's going at him, and RFK, who knows him by his first name, instead of saying Senator Sanders like everybody else, he's such a Democrat. The Kennedys have the right to do this. Bernie, he goes, Bernie, you get more money than anyone from the farmers. I knew you were going to say that. I was looking for his papers. I knew you were going to say that. So it was hilarious.
It's not true. It's patently false. It's not real. It's not true.
That's not true. That's not true. Anyway, Gordon, I wanted to talk to you here. By the way, that's my son, Carl, who's also on the show. He's in the director's chair, the producer's chair.
Carl, thank you for the coffee this morning. Coffee is plural.
Oh, it was my pleasure.
By the way.
Absolutely.
Well, you guys went out for coffee.
Coffee is plural. We went on a coffee
is a
tour.
coffee connoisseur. Mm-hmm. He goes to coffee shops all over the world. But here's the reason why he's on the show today. Gordon has been on various episodes before. He was, for years, he did not want to be seen. You were like a mystery
But
guy.
heard.
Yeah, you wanted to be
Heard
heard.
but not
You wanted-
seen.
You were kind of
Instead
like
of seen but not heard.
Yeah.
you wanted to be. Yeah, it's an interesting kind of psychological profile. He had his picture. He'd give you his contact information, but his picture was kind of like, those blurred out images, like someone working for the CIA. But I understood because you had, at one point, you had a lot of crossover influence in the literary world or in some other academic world. You were trying to kind of walk carefully between, but it's too late. Now you're done.
Here we are.
Walk the plank, and here we are.
So when you think about Trump says he's ending federal funding for NPR and PBS, what would you do if he was to turn around and go, well, I'm going to turn this over to my MAGA people, some of my more maybe thoughtful, I don't want to use the word sophisticated, but some of the educated conservatives. How would you use, because I think it's a mistake to shut him down. I think the Democrats are going to roar the engines back up. I would rather infiltrate it with, we have other perspectives. How would we use NPR, PBS, or now the Kennedy Center we have an unprecedented moment with Trump in office to have our ideas somehow imprinted on culture for however long they're going to last. What would you do if you were suddenly given the NPR, PBS mantle?
I've personally enjoyed listening to NPR and PBS for decades. I think they play a vital role in the spectrum of entertainment and educational content that is necessary for America. However, it has become clearer and clearer to me over time the way they have drifted away from what I think their original purpose and missional focus has been, or could be, or should be, into something that's so highly politicized that they acknowledge themselves that they're predominantly a reflection of one ideological side and not the other. And I don't think they've been open to robust debate. I think they've failed in considerable and very, very disappointing ways. But as a concept, love NPR. They've had so many great programs. We can't discount that. And I think with Doge and all the things that are necessary at this point in time to, you go at this with a chainsaw or an axe as opposed to a more precise approach. And really, let's just rejigger, let's refactor what these programs could and bring. They bring a lot of good, but not all. Nor does anything. Look, you can go through the whole entertainment and broadcast spectrum and say there's good, bad, and ugly, but we should be free speech.
You're
debate.
being far more kind to them than most of my.
They've been kind to me. I have many
Yeah.
friends at NPR and PBS, and I respect them and appreciate them. But
Do they share your some of your conservative worldview?
Not necessarily, but we've always been open to, I think, considerable, robust divergence of opinions and discussions.
But they
and we
haven't
need
represented that divergence of opinion.
They've drifted away, and I think by their own admission, they are in a place that is decidedly.
Right.
It's
Polarizing.
It's polarizing.
But I remember, but it makes me stop and it makes me question to what extent I was drinking the Kool-Aid in all the years that I never had a political grid. So I just had a Bible grid. So I never really understood what Clinton was really up to, except Monica Lewinsky. That wasn't good. I mean, so a lot of us that were in the evangelical, Pentecostal, charismatic world, it's a significant voting bloc. It got Reagan elected. But when I would hear NPR, dun, 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 and they had the All Things Considered segment, I used to drive in Providence, and I'd listen to NPR. It was ubiquitous. You couldn't avoid it in Boston, that area.
I think that musical mnemonic was from Jeopardy, by the way.
Huh?
I think you just gave up with the musical mnemonic from Jeopardy.
No. It's, yes, that did sound like Jeopardy. I agree. But how many of you remember, and now you're going to get me defensive, because I remembered the theme song to that segment on All Things Considered was similar to Jeopardy, but they had their own deal.
Can you form it like a question?
I'm going to find the theme song. I'm going to put it in this segment so you could all hear it. From NPR, All Things Considered. But It was this guy with a kind of unique, kind of nasal quality to his voice. And he would talk about politics. And he had this cadence about him that was storytelling and whimsical and believable and credible. But I was getting a perspective. I didn't know that. I was getting the liberal perspective on whatever Bush was doing. And it was always like a cynical dig on Rumsfeld or Bush. And it was a question. But my point is this. Media, and you're a kind of a student of media and information. Do you see any hope for legacy media, like New York Times type stuff? It's going to be there, and you could say you could talk about all you want. How do you influence institutional legacy media like that? How do you get into it? How do you shape it?
Well, you'd have to go back to Marshall McLuhan and others who saw the power. The media is the message. So at what point did media become inculcated with ideas that were not simply based on the idea that you're presenting a variety of points of view in entertaining, engaging ways, or presenting the news? For example, the history of reportage or journalism. What is it? What accountability is inherent in that process as opposed to just having a partisan point of view at some level and presenting everything from a certain persuasive opinion that wasn't necessarily objective.
Right.
And I happened to end up being friends with Peter Jennings at ABC for years, was very, very kind, very generous to me in many ways. And we had some great conversations in his office and other places. I was there when Roone Arledge was the head of ABC News, and they were sold to Disney. ABC Cap Cities was sold in the mid-90s, I'm going to say around 96, for something, it seems like a fairly small number now, like let's say 19 billion, I may be off on that. But Roone Arledge said this is essentially the end of investigative journalism and the beginning of infotainment.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I'd never heard that term before. Infotainment, what's that? Well, when you look at legacy, whatever legacy is, that doesn't seem adequate to the specifics of corporate influence of infotainment. So Disney had an agenda. Let's inform people to the extent that they're sufficiently entertained that really objectivity and a really, really disciplined view of how you report things from a variety of sides so you can form a perception that's really closer to the truth as opposed to closer to something that's going to get better ratings or is going to reflect an ideological bias that's going to also get certain kinds of ratings and responses. And that was a warning shot. So when ABC was sold to Disney, everybody in the newsroom that particular time put on Mickey Mouse ears. And they said, we're no longer ABC, we're ABCD.
Yeah.
So the Disney effect began, and they were mocking it. They were mocking it themselves. But of course, you're going to lose your job if you question the corporate suits that are essentially over time engineering what you're doing. So a reporter in the field and a producer who's given, or an editor whose job is dependent on complying and comporting with the interests of the people that are paying the bills and raising the advertising dollars, there's a matrix there of considerations that are just a reflection of human nature and something transactional and commercialized. And at the end of the day, where would you go to get an objective opinion or ideas that are not compliant with a lot of it? We don't even know ourselves really to what extent my father says, be careful of holding opinions because very soon they hold you.
Yeah.
So I get an idea from someone or somewhere, and I'm a talking parrot. Maybe you might be loquacious and rhetorically gifted in some way to present an idea. So you become fashionably adherent to your ideas as opposed to, well, maybe that would change if I had different information, more information, a different perspective. But we end up defending ourselves because we're interested in ourselves instead of really being
I'm going to throw this over.
changed by
I got a
real
question for
ideas
you.
and real facts.
That point is important. Carl, I'm going to open this up for you for a question, but I want to make a quick comment. So I'm reading Jonathan Haidt, the psychologist professor. He said that he was observing how on Twitter that once a person committed themselves to a public opinion on Twitter, they became ego committed to a perspective that when contrary facts and information came in, he had statistics for this, that in, over 65% of the time, the person will double down on what they already committed themselves to, rather than going back and with the fact checking and correcting it. So I think there's this idea that once you start, first you got the problem of if you say something, you want to back it up and you push back on new information versus being open to, oh, I didn't know that, and then changing your thinking. Secondly, your audience creates some of that. Mm-hmm. So I felt like when I had friends of mine that were on TBN, I remember thinking, I wish I was on TBN. And then I kind of thought the advantage of not being on TBN when they had big TV ministries is that the audience controls them to a great extent. They've learned what responds to the ratings and they learn what responds to the product offer. So now if they become enlightened on a new idea that they have to persuade their audience into alignment with, but the audience initially doesn't like it, they won't go there. So you're not going to get nuances of ideas that are going to really educate and move you to a new idea, but you're going to have to, your audience now controls you. And I thought, I don't have that problem, which is why I think I was able to go into the Trump world faster, more furiously than a lot of other people, because they suffered a loss when they did it. I didn't. I gained a following. And I gained a following for saying what I wanted to say. So, and that was important. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back, by the way.
We're entering a period of time that has increased hostility against people of faith. It's a time when Christians are going to be tested on a moral, physical, psychological, and even a financial basis. I'm here to remind you that God is the one who has blessed you thus far, and he will take care of you in the future. You have a divine responsibility, however, to see trouble and prepare yourself. For example, with record inflation eating away at the value of the US dollar, the savings in your retirement account is in danger of slipping away. I recommend diversifying your 401k or IRA out of paper assets and into physical gold. And the best way to do that is with a gold IRA from Birch Gold Group. Now that includes no penalties, there's no taxes when you transfer current retirement funds into Birch Gold. To see how it works, I want you to go to lancewallnau.com/Birch and get your free info kit, and you'll be glad that you did.
Welcome back to the Lance Wallnau Show. I've got my guest, Gordon Pennington, with me, and my son, Carl. Carl, do you have any thoughts before I kind of change the subject? I want to talk about education in a minute.
So many thoughts. First and foremost, the saying that we don't see things as they are, we see them as we are. So the idea of there being any type of objective opinions, I personally disagree with. I think if you have an objective anything, then it doesn't really matter what your opinion is, because the objectivity of it endures, regardless of the subjective nature of your perspective. So that's one thing. Two, I think the conflation of infotainment with modern news outlets, and when I say news with air quotes, I'm talking about the Daily Show with Jon Stewart, or Last Week Tonight with John Oliver, or any of these comedians who now have taken the role of quote unquote journalists, themselves never actually doing any level of journalism whatsoever, other than just reading the articles and then synthesizing it with, or boiling it down to their own perspectives and then regurgitating that for the audience, has changed the way that we actually take in news, where we now need it to be light. We need it to be funny. And when I say we, I mean primarily millennials and younger. We don't want a Walter Cronkite saying, and that's the news, or that's the way the cookie crumbles. Like, we don't want that. We want somebody who's going to give us some spoonfuls of sugar with the medicine as we're taking it, so to say. So I don't really know how we get out of that, other than having long format conversations that would allow for nuance instead of just sound bites, because everybody wants to go viral. Everybody wants their 15 minutes of fame, as it were.
Well, and I don't care how you cut it. You're in a commercial enterprise. It takes me money to put this on, so I have to balance out. You know, either if you're doing a biblical program, you gotta do offerings or something, or you're buying airtime. And so what happens is you develop an audience, and your audience develops a demographic, and so you're suddenly not. You end up creating a following that has a certain tolerance, desire, aptitude for a certain message. That's how the polarization happens. Then you've got your large MSNBC or Rachel Maddow, consistent group, large compared to other people, but it's not listening to other voices. That's why the Joe Rogan format does have an appeal, because it's like at least you're hearing. But even he sticks within a comfortable zone. I mean, he's not bringing in Charlie Kirk and Steve Bannon. He doesn't like going there. He'll go with Jordan Peterson, but at least he's having a conversation. So, Gordon, I am passionate. We got 8 minutes in this segment. I'm passionate about your passion for education. We're talking the media mountain right now. We're talking about journalism, some on the entertainment mountain, but this other mountain that I'm looking at is education. That one is shaping a whole generation from kindergarten all the way to the university. And you're an educated man, but I need you to give us a survey of what should we be looking for in classical education that's missing in contemporary education?
Well, Dorothy Sayers came out with a monograph in, I think, 1948, where she just went back to the lost tools of learning, the Greeks, the Romans. What was that trivium of essential understanding education? You start with understanding language itself, grammar. Then you begin to understand how it applies to a variety of circumstances and realities that we have to engage in when it comes to logic and reason. And then finally, you have to be able to espouse and convey your ideas with rhetoric. So based on that trivium of ideas, and then later, coming back to the idea that we have to apply this in the circumstances of our contemporary educational models, we have to go back and rediscover the lost tools of learning. And what does it look like when we apply that within a certain cultural set of expectations? Respect, honor, curiosity, understanding that we're part of a tradition. We're passing something along. We're passing the torch. And what is education? It's soul formation. It's citizen formation. In its essence, this is what a society or culture determines is essential to a more complete, if not perfect, but at least a complete formation of the soul to prepare us for all the exigencies of life and to contribute as citizens and citizens of the kingdom and citizens of the larger, civics and culture that we're in. So education, we've lost this picture of this. And we really need to go back. Doug Wilson prepared a book, I think it was about 1984, 85, Recovering the Lost Tools of Learning. That was the beginning of the classical Christian education model. How is that different than Christian education? Because it familiarizes students with, again, a set of cultural norms, not just biblical education or a biblical worldview, very important, essential. But broadening that, you have to understand the great books, the great ideas, the ideas that contemporaneously challenge the Bible, challenge that thinking. We're in a postmodern world. What are the existential assumptions around that? So education doesn't take place in a vacuum. It takes place in a real cultural context, including parenting in the home. How do we educate parents to help facilitate the education of their child? Again, this idea, the paideia, is something we could unpack over time, but it's a set of cultural learning essentials in terms of the culture we create around education.
So one of the things that you said there that I think might have slipped past people is creating a culture of honor and of respect and of curiosity and of, now you're talking about the social contract that goes on in the right learning environment where you're teaching the child not only the content of rhetoric and logic and grammar, but you're teaching them how to interact with one another and with authority and how to create an environment of mutual respect. Now that goes to why some of these prep schools you see in like the movies at Cambridge or the Oxford, where the students are all dressed in these kind of like suits as little kids.
Uniforms. Uniforms.
Uniforms. And even like when in the Christian schools, you had a Day Spring Christian Academy had a uniform, and then there was a protocol. Talk to me about that's very intentional in certain schools, isn't it?
Yeah, of course. But you're talking not about Oxford, Cambridge. You're talking about Eton, or you're talking in the Americas about. You're talking about Andover. You're talking about the best prep, Trinity, and the best prep schools that people.
But there's something that they've tapped into regarding creating the environment of mutual esteem and respect.
In a sense, it's not there in the same way that we might assume, because those are schools that are preparing a new generation of leaders, and the assumptions around leadership and what that looks like for the body politic has changed. You talked about a social contract. Tell me what people assume about that social contract today. Where is it? What is it? Absent that, we're in this experimental time where, with no social contract, no essential understanding of the fundamentals of Western civilization and what's packed into that, we're adrift. We're in a grand
give me the classroom
experiment.
culture in one of these classical Christian education schools that you like so much. Tell me, I go into the classroom. Is it going to be spitball and kids and and phones in the classroom and kids texting and board? What's going to be in this type of school where you've gone and said, now that is producing an extraordinary education encounter?
I think one of the ways I would try to reduce it and distill it and refine it would be to say that it creates a respect for learning itself in the context of honor and respect for learning itself. So there's a sense in which there are certain assumptions about that. You will comport with the discipline of the classroom. You will comport with honor and respect. And that's mutual. The teachers and the faculty and administration will respect the children, will give them a safe place to learn and grow. And then the thing that really has touched me the most, where I wept with a sense of joy and wonder when I saw for the first time in a classical Christian school in Atlanta, Georgia, with my friend Dr. Davies Owens, and I saw children in the 8th grade talking about history as though it wasn't just a process of rote recitation, it was a process of innate discovery and a native desire, native curiosity to learn for learning's sake, to become more complete persons, more complete souls. When I saw that, absent any other miscreant behavior or the kind of things that you have to manage in most public school classrooms are subject to the lack of a social contract or a social understanding, where the kids come to that classroom without a sense of social decorum or respect or manners. And so it's 90% of the time, it's just managing behavior. And how are you going to learn in that? So if you could make it possible, and you can, today there are classrooms where kids are actually experiencing something that I think is so rare. And we've only got, I would say, less than 3,000 schools in the country that are embracing or inculcating these ideas and values. But they're there, and they need to go. We need a Carnegie moment. Someone who comes along and says, more than anything else, the virtue of learning, and for Carnegie, it was establishing libraries.
So you're talking Andrew Carnegie.
Andrew
one
Carnegie,
of the
early
wealth
20th century.
Carnegie.
If you would donate the land, he would build you a library, but you had to agree to 10% of that building cost would be built into the management and maintenance and overhead. And if you would do that, he would build you a library. And to this day, Carnegie Library is an essential part of our learning infrastructure in communities all over the country. We need that in education today. And it's essential. Whatever gains or changes we might think are productive and merit our support today are going to be gone in a very short time if we don't amend and correct the education process, which is largely 11,000 hours of discipleship, if you will, in which a secular government inculcates kids with the propaganda of the secular state without challenge. The money must follow the student, or people are basically doubly fined, if you will, or doubly burdened with paying the taxes to support a public education system that's failing and largely controlled by the NEA and the teachers' unions, versus having the freedom to do something that's a blended education model where they can educate kids partly at home, partly in a school, whatever it takes. Even if it's a minimum viable product, we have got to do something better for education, and we must do it now.
Well, I have a couple thoughts on that. One of them, maybe you guys at home don't know this, but for most professional librarian positions, particularly in academic, public, and special libraries, a master's degree in library and information science, MLIS, is generally required. In my opinion, why any librarian needs a master's degree in order to help people check out books is absurd. It's an unnecessary bottleneck. It doesn't actually help society. It just reinforces academics being in their ivory towers. That's one thing. Another is, Frank Zappa talked on this a while ago, but when we removed civics from schools and instead inserted social studies, we got an entire population of people who don't know how our government works, doesn't know how our government operates, doesn't understand what's actually going on, and instead understands the social elements of what's happening, as opposed to what actually goes into those social elements, how we got here.
Frank Zappa, the great educational leader.
Help, I'm a rock, Absolutely. But yeah, those are just some initial thoughts. And how do we curate a culture of curiosity when we're teaching kids what to think instead of how to think?
Exactly.
How do we actually navigate that? So those are just some of my thoughts.
That's good, Carl.
Thank you.
Which I think is part of the appeal of Charlie Kirk and the billions of views that they get with their little vignettes on campuses, is where he opens up the mic and does these idea exchanges. And what you see quite frequently is that children that have a passionate, emotional attachment to what they were taught were not taught why those things work or how they work, but we're taught what to believe. And Charlie has a worldview that goes past that and says, why this, why that, and how do you answer this? They haven't thought through the assumptions that are in their beliefs. But it shows the power of propaganda, which Mao succeeded in, vigorously. And you can intimidate students into conformity, and then you can subject them to your propaganda.
Tragically, a very large and increasingly larger portion of our population, fellow citizens, are being dumbed down to the point where they don't even have the basic understandings of what it means to be effectively engage in citizenship or this social contract you mentioned. And at the end of the day, I keep thinking back about, when it comes to jurisprudence or what we hold high as the highest standard of our understanding of ideas and truth. It's putting your hand on a Bible in a courtroom and being sworn in for testimony. And here's the process. With your hand on a Bible, which represents to this day, there's no higher standard of social or cultural or spiritual truth in our or any society,
Right.
really. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? There's a standard to refer to.
And you think about it, man. And even atheists, agnostics, the ACLU, they don't go there. They don't say remove that moment. Because where else are you going to pledge if not to some concept of ultimate integrity?
What have we got if we remove that as the standard of truth? What have we got to substitute for that?
Well, you have Trump's battle with district judges right now on immigration, but that's for another battle. That's another conversation. We have to sign off. We went a little bit over. Thank you, Carl. Thank you, Gordon.
Pleasure.
We have to let's bring George Soros back out. We got George Soros. And his son Jonathan will be on our show soon. And here, get the camera over there. You're moving more towards the middle. Our camera people aren't seeing it. All right. Well, listen, we're going to be seeing you again tomorrow. And perhaps we have a brief announcement I want to do before we sign off. I want you to check this out.
I wanted to take a minute to talk about one of my great heroes of the faith, which is Mike Lindell. What's really cool about Mike is it's not just the pillow. It's the fact that the guy makes really cool products. For instance, I start my day off with my coffee. I had a cup of coffee the other day here in the office, and I said, no, I want that. It wasn't like Starbucks. It tastes better. And it was Mike's coffee. I said, what is it? They go, Mike Lindell's coffee. I said, my gosh, get a bunch of my coffees. Now, the best way to start the day is you put on these slippers, right? And have your My Coffee. If you've not worked with these slippers yet, I'm not kidding you. There's a special kind of a design that Mike has put into these with 4 layers of cushion with a solid sole and a fur interior. I call it my sip and slip strategy. I start my day off by slipping on my slippers, then having a sip of Mike's coffee. But you know what else I'm curious about now? Because I've got to check out the 2.0 pillow. The 2.0 pillow actually is designed so that it distributes the heat of your own head, your face. You know, you're lying there, and it makes it so the pillow's always cool. Now, I like that because I wake up in the middle of the night and have to flip over my pillow because it gets hot. Mike's solved that problem. I want you to go to mypillow.com, promo code Lance, because you can get a discount that I've set up for the pillows, for the coffee, and for the slippers. And do it today. You'll be happy.
Did you enjoy this latest episode? Please remember to share it with your friends, because the more knowledge you have, the better equipped you are to navigate the world.